This session is part of the Indie Author Fringe Conference, a 3 times a year author conference fringed to the major publishing fairs London Book Fair, Book Expo America and Frankfurt Book Fair. The Indie Author Fringe is run under the stewardship of the Alliance of Independent Authors, is organised by writers for writers and is free to attend. Let's see who's sharing self-publishing insights in this session.
Welcome to this session of the Indie Author Fringe. My name is Mark Dawson and I am from the Self-Publishing Formula. I'm also a best-selling thriller writer. You may have heard of me. I've written things like the John Milton series, the Beatrix Rose and the Isabella Rose series. And what I've been asked to talk to you about today is a kind of an update as to what's hot and what's not quite so hot in author marketing these days. So we're going to be looking at things like Facebook, we're going to look at Amazon ads, we're going to look at some fairly esoteric new stuff that I'm quite excited about, and I'm going to give you some tips and some tricks and some strategies that you can use to improve your own advertising. And of course, that should mean you sell more books and find more readers. So just a couple of quick credentials. First of all, if you haven't heard of me, as I said, I'm one of the founders of the Self-Publishing Formula. We have a podcast that goes out every Friday, and we've had people like Orna and Joanna Penn and many others, nearly 90 others, on the show so far. We also have a free Facebook community. If you search Self-Publishing Formula on Facebook, you'll find there's a closed group that we will let you in if you ask to join, and that's moderated. It's a safe place where we talk about book marketing for the most part. And we also have 2 courses. We have Facebook ads, or it used to be called Facebook ads, it's now called Ads for Authors. That next opens on the 1st of November 2017. We also have Self-Publishing 101, which is a more basic course that teaches you what you need to do to get your books up and then get them starting to sell. And that course will be open again next year. And then on the other side of the business, as I said, I write thrillers. I've had more than 1 million sales, probably closer to 2 million now. In the 5 years that I've been writing. I regularly speak at conferences. I've been just come back from Althorp with Amazon, the Althorp Literary Festival. Before that, I was in Matera in southern Italy. I went to RWA in Orlando. And I'm generally pretty busy. One of the side effects of all that travel is, as you may have detected, I have a slight cold at the moment. So I hope it's not too distracting. I'll try not to sniff too much as we get into the meat of this quick presentation. So tip number 1 is kind of a general tip, a general piece of advice that you should always keep in mind when you are advertising, because that is going to involve you spending some money most of the time. So you want to make sure that you know what's going out and what is coming in, or what could come back in the future. So the first thing we're going to look at is tip 1, and that is know your numbers. Now, the key numbers I think you need to know are read through first of all, and then return on investment. Now, I'm going to go through both of those in a bit more detail now, but the first one there, read through, is I think fundamentally important. And just to prove that I am very far from always right, when I started running these advertising courses, and in fact when I started advertising myself about 3 years ago, the only thing that I bore in mind in my calculations when I was working out whether ads were profitable or not was the immediate return that I was making. By that, I mean, if I was advertising a $6.99 box set, the only income or revenue that I would consider would be the sale of that box set, the royalty generated by the sale of that box set. So in other words, around about $4.80. Now, that is fine. It's certainly the most conservative and the most safe way to assess whether campaigns are working, because you can work out really to the last cent whether your campaigns are profitable or not. But the more I looked into that, the more I realized that I was being a little bit too conservative, to the extent that it was actually a little bit unrealistic. So if you think about your own reading habits, you'll be much like me, I suspect. If you start reading a series by an author that you like, so let's just say we're reading the James Patterson Alex Cross series. If you start with the first one and you enjoy it, it's extremely likely that if not the next book you read, certainly one of the next books you'll read will be the second book in the series. And with someone like Lee Child, for example, with the Jack Reacher series, there are around about 22 novels in that series now. And it's not unusual for his superfans to start on book one, get completely hooked, and then work their way all the way through the series, buying and reading a new book from Lee every single year. Now, if we're working out our ad income, we need to take that into account. Excuse me, a little cough. So when we're looking at read-through, we will need to consider if we can work out exactly what kind of percentage that readers will actually get through when it comes to our series. Also, it doesn't have to be series. It can also be books by you. So let's look at something like Ian Banks, his literary fiction, all very nicely branded, but not linked in series in the same way that some of his science fiction was. But people would enjoy him as a writer and indeed as a brand, and they would buy all of his books. It's exactly the same principle. We'll get back to that in a minute. The second number that I want you to bear in mind is return on investment. Now that is very simple. It is a simple calculation, and we'll get into that after we've looked at read-through in a bit more detail. But it is very important to always keep that in mind, because it will tell us very simply whether our ads are in the black or in the red. Okay, but let's return to read-through now. So as I said, readers don't just read one book. Typically, if you've got a series, there's a good chance they'll read more than one of the books. So we need to bear that in mind as we are making our calculations. And in particular, we need to incorporate that into any decisions that we make with regard to how valuable the first book, for example, in a series would be. Now, there are a number of ways of calculating read-through, but the best way really is just to look at it in pure mathematical terms. Well, the best way really, I suppose I could correct myself there, would be for Amazon to tell me how often someone who buys book one then goes on to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, Amazon won't do that. They're not able to. There are lots of reasons why they can't. I've also asked Apple, and they weren't able to either. But those lovely folks at Kobo might be providing me with a bit more information on that. So that would be something that I would pass on to the community if I can get anything useful and that I think is helpful. But in the absence of that, let's look at it in a purely mathematical sense. If we have book one and we sell 100 copies of book one, we then need to look at how many copies of book two we've sold. If we've sold 60 copies of book two, then our read-through percentage from book one to book two is 60%. It really is as simple as that. And we'll look at it in a little bit more detail when we get to a practical example in just a minute. The other way that we can do it, so assuming that we can't get anything particularly helpful from the retailers, is to look at surveying our readers. So one of the things that I do every single year around about Christmas time is to send out a survey to my readers, and at the moment it's going to be around about 100,000 readers on my mailing list when I send this survey out in early January. And one of the questions that I always ask them is how many books by me have they read? And I'm just looking at the graph now from last year's survey, and the median is probably around 6 to 7 copies. So also just looking at that now, I've obviously got more than that number of books. I've got probably 25 or perhaps even 30 books now. But looking at the graph, I can see that the slices from 6 to 10, 11 to 14, and then more than 15 probably add up to around about 60%, I would say. So if we assume on the low end that I'm getting a read-through of 6 books, so if someone buys book 1, often they'll go through to book 5 or book 6, we can start to incorporate that in a fairly conservative calculation of read-through. So if then we look at calculating the value of the sales of those books, incorporating read-through, now it's going to be a little bit more difficult for me to describe this to you, but I'll do my best. So if we look at the first book in my Milton series, which is called The Cleaner, that retails at $1.99 in the States. That means I get a royalty of $1.39. So every time I sell one, I know that I'm getting $1.39 back. The second book in the series is called Saint Death, and that retails at $3.99. So I get a royalty of $2.79, meaning that whenever I get one sale of that on its own, I'm getting $2.79 back. But the read-through from The Cleaner to Saint Death is 53%. So in other words, 53% of people who buy The Cleaner will then go on to buy Saint Death, which is not too unhealthy. I'm reasonably happy with that. And then to use that 53% read through when we're calculating the value of a sale of book 2, all we need to do is to take that 53% and apply it to the royalty that we would get. So it's $2.79. We want to find 53% of that. That comes out at $1.47. Then if we move down, the next book is called The Driver, and that, let's say, also retails at $3.99, so the same $2.79 royalty. The read-through from book 2 to book 3 is 62%. So in other words, 62% of people who read The Saint Death will then go on to read The Driver. So we take that 62%, and we look to apply that to the numbers as well. Actually, I'm going to correct myself. I'm going to be even more conservative. What we really need to do is to look at the read-through from The Driver, book 3, and compare it to the first one, The Cleaner. So we always want to be comparing subsequent books with that first one so that we can get as accurate as possible an idea of what the read-through for the series in a cumulative fashion is. And once we arrive at those calculations, so for example, let's say I had 100 sales of The Cleaner and I had 40 sales of The Driver, then we'd use 40% and apply that against $2.79 royalty. Assuming that we work all the way through the series, working that out, we can then add up the revenue, the adjusted revenue, adjusted in line with the percentage, to get a total that we think we will usually make when we sell one copy of the first book in the series. So I know that's complicated, and it would be easier if I could show you something on the screen, but I hope that's enough detail for you to understand exactly what that means. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail with regards to what that actually does to my bottom line in a minute. But let's just come back and fold that into return on investment. Now, return on investment on any ad campaign is really simple. It's revenue, so money coming in, minus cost divided by cost. That is return on investment. Now, I want to compare that with what I used to do with regards to just counting the sale that was generated by the ad and not incorporating any read-through. So let's say we're running Facebook ads on a book that retails at $1.99 when we'll get $1.39 back as a royalty. We're also going to assume that our cost per click is 20 pence and we have 15 clicks. That means that we've spent £3. So the first stage of our calculation, the money coming in was $1.39. Money going out was £3. So that means that we've actually made an immediate loss. We then divide that by 3 again, and that gives us a negative return on investment of 53%. Negative 53%. So not very good. But let's just change those numbers around and look at it with read-through incorporated. So this time we're going to assume that the read-through value of my series, and let's just say there's 12 books in the series, I've calculated what the sale of one book will actually net me when read-through is included. That comes out to £14.74. So let's run those calculations again. £14.74 minus the cost of the ad, so that was £3. We divide that by 3 and we get a return on investment of a frankly ridiculous 1,374%. So we go from a 53% loss to a really gigantic return. And that is the only difference there is that we are perhaps being slightly more realistic with regards to exactly what we think the first sale is worth. So it's not just that 199 times 70%. It's actually more likely to be something around £15. Even if we were really conservative and we halved that read-through, we would still be looking at well over 100% return on investment. So very good indeed. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is AMS, or Amazon Marketing Services ads. So these are really cool ads. They've been running for a couple of years now, not particularly effective in the early days. I was one of the early beta testers and I stopped testing them because I thought they were rubbish. But again, goes to show that I was wrong. They have been worked on and tweaked since then, and they're now an important part of my constant ad strategy. So they come in two distinct flavors. We have sponsored keyword ads. Now, if you go into the Amazon search bar, type in a search term, so it could be Mark Dawson, John Milton books. That would count as a keyword. And if I've targeted those keywords, then one of my ads will come back and it will appear at the bottom of the search results. You'll get the book that I'm advertising coming up with a bunch of other books as well. And I'm hoping, of course, that will mean that you will be tempted to try my book out rather than the other ones. They can also appear on the product page beneath the Also Bought carousel. The other flavor of ads are the product display ads. And in these ones, we're actually targeting books themselves. We're targeting ASINs, so Amazon Standard Identification Numbers. All of our books have those. We're going to be targeting those themselves, and the ads for our books will appear just below the buy button. So really prime real estate to get our books in just as people are in a buying mood. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I've got a few tips in just a minute, but I want to tell you what my lifetime results have been on these ads. So to date, and I'm recording this in early October 2017, I've spent $4,956 on these ads. I've had 35 million impressions. So in other words, that means that my ads have been shown 35 million times. Now, some advertisers, particularly in the traditional industry, would consider that to be a really fantastic price for that kind of exposure. So you're teaching people about your books and your brand, and for $5,000 you were able to get that ad or those ads shown 35 million times. But that's not as far as it goes with these ads. They actually generate money as well. So those impressions have generated clicks of 22,792. So that number of clicks have then sent the clicker to my product page. My click-through rate is 0.066%. But the most interesting for us, the total royalties generated has been $6,879. So that's a return on investment of just around about 40%. And since I started to pay a bit more attention to these ads and started working on them a bit harder, I've managed to get my daily return on investment up to around about 100%. So much more reasonable. So in other words, spend 5, get 10 back. I'll do that every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Okay, so the challenges of these ads, they are sometimes difficult to get Amazon to actually spend the money. So you're only getting charged for clicks. So you need to create successful ads in order to be charged. I would love to spend more money. That probably means I need to write better ads, better ad copy, have better images in the ad. That mean that people are more likely to click. But that is a challenge. A good way to get around that is to just duplicate lots and lots of different ads. And you can get the same kind of effect just by running lots of ads rather than getting one to spend the total budget that you want spent. The other challenge is assessing the data. I am afraid, I think that the back end is really, really poor. I'm not particularly impressed with the data that Amazon presents us with. It's presented in a cumulative fashion, which is very difficult to detect patterns that you might see, or even to start working out which ads are working well and which ones aren't working, which ones are getting impressions and which ones aren't getting impressions on a day-to-day basis. So that's exacerbated when you have lots and lots of ads running. I have about 400 ads running at any one time. And in order to be able to slice and dice that, what I've done is to create a pretty simple Excel spreadsheet. And when I say simple, I really do mean that, because I'm not very good at Excel. But what I've done is create something that means I can take my my daily Excel spreadsheets that I download from Amazon, just plug them into my own spreadsheet, and then that will cut the data up and present it to me in a daily fashion, so I can see those patterns emerging, and that enables me to test and tweak and do things much more effectively. Okay, so tip 3 is look at Bookbub's CPM ads. Now, I'm not talking about Bookbub's featured deals. We all know what they are. They are the gold standard of those email marketing deals that we get in our inboxes every day, telling us which books are on deal in the genres that we want to read and to learn about. Those are very effective. They always have been. I've got one tomorrow, which means I'm quite excited because it means I'll shift several thousand copies of the book that's on deal. But I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the CPM ads. So Those are the ads that you will see at the bottom of your BookBub email. So if you scroll down, right at the bottom, you'll see something that looks a little different from the rest of the ads, and that is one that has been created either using BookBub's own ad generator or by the author involved generating their own ad, their own copy, and uploading that. Now, I originally tested these fairly early as well. I was quite early to this program as a beta tester. And again, I wasn't blown away. I thought they were good, but they tended to exhaust the audience quite quickly compared to something like Facebook, which has a vast audience of millions and millions and millions of people that we can target our ads to. BookBub, even though it's the biggest of these platforms in our space, is still small by comparison. And I found that I was chewing through the relevant audiences very quickly, and that meant that my clicks became more expensive too quickly, and I wasn't generating positive returns on investment, so I stopped, and I forgot about them for a while. I then had a chat with Adam Croft, who is a well-known author, took one of my classes a couple of years ago, and is actually contributing a class on these BookBub ads to the next launch for ads for authors in November. And Adam said, "No, Mark, you are completely wrong about these ads. They work really, really well." And we looked into it, and he told me what he was doing. And what they're really good for is targeting authors who you can't get to on Facebook. So I've got a fairly big audience now, but I can't be targeted on Facebook because Facebook, for one reason or another, hasn't indexed my page. I've got about 30,000 fans on the page, but you wouldn't be able to use me as a target in your Facebook ads, which you might like to do if you write thrillers. But a good way around that is to look at BookBub, because I have a pretty decent footprint on BookBub. I've had lots of deals. There are lots of my readers over there, people who've interacted with my various ads on the platform over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. So you can target me there, and you can target lots and lots of other indies who might write in your particular niche, which could be very small. You can also target mid-listers that might otherwise be difficult to reach on other platforms, and you can also target very effectively readers on other stores. So I started to experiment in September, and here are the results that I had. In September, I spent $931 on these BookBub CPM ads, and CPM effectively means cost per meal, and meal in this sense means 1,000. So you're getting charged by the thousands of impressions. I had 4,552 clicks, 258,625 impressions, and I had I sold enough to generate 455 sales, which made a revenue of Sorry, my numbers are all over the shop here today. I made a revenue of $2,184.96, and that means it was a return on investment of 135%. And as I say, the cool thing about that was I was able to reach into different stores. So I was able to kind of slice the numbers up a little bit, and to break it down, just to give you an indication of how well that did, I generated an extra $25 a day on Kobo, $5.6 a day more on iBooks, $3 a day more on Google. So we're not talking about huge numbers here, but actually to get anything that shifts the needle on Google is pretty impressive. And $15 a day more on Amazon.au. So you can see I'm focusing on either the second tier retailers, people like Kobo, iBooks, and Google, not necessarily Amazon, unless I'm using a different geographical Amazon store like Amazon Australia. But adding up all those numbers, I found at the end of the month, the return on investment was 45%. So really good, and just very useful to be able to shift books on those other retailers as well. So I am spending a lot more time looking at these right now. And my advice would be to target indies. Look at people like me or other indies in your genres. Target small mid-listers. Don't target Amazon. Amazon is very, very competitive. Everyone will automatically target Amazon because that's the biggest store, and people think you can't make any money on the other stores. Well, that's just wrong. Amazon may be more expensive to get clicks or to get those 1,000 impressions. You may find that you have a much cheaper time of it targeting readers on Kobo, for example. Now you can monitor these with affiliate tracking. So places like Kobo, iTunes will have an affiliate program that will enable you to have a specific unique link Then you'll be able to monitor to see how many sales were generated by people clicking on that specific link. And of course, you can double check all of that with benchmarks, which is what I did when I was just roughly working out those numbers in the previous example. But definitely have a look at Bookbub. It's a beta program at the moment, so not everyone has access, but they are slowly rolling it out. And I think if you emailed them and said that you'd like to try, you'd probably be able to bump yourself up the queue a little bit. So the next tip is something that I'm best known for, and that's Facebook ads. Now, Facebook ads, you can go into forums and you can ask other authors, and lots of people will moan that Facebook is too crowded, it's impossible to get a return, it's people like me have made it too difficult to advertise. Well, frankly, that is BS. Facebook is still by far the most powerful advertising tool that we have available to us as forward-thinking independent authors. It is still possible to make an immediate return, so it is still possible to take that $6.99 book, could be a box set, could be a single book, and to get that $4.80 royalty, and to earn enough from immediate sales at that $4.80 level to cover the costs and beat the costs of the ads. It is possible to do that, and I do that most days, but it is much easier when we bring Readthrough into it. So it could be Readthrough from box set 1 to box set 2, 3, 4, or from book 1 to 2 to 3, or just Readthrough through your series. It could be non-fiction, could be people who follow you as an author. But when you bring that into the equation, it does make it much easier to make really strong, positive returns. Now, this might all seem theoretical, but I have been tracking this really carefully over the course of the last couple of months. So I started doing a big campaign. I reduced the price of the first book in the Milton series to 99 pence in the UK, and I spent around about £5,000 in August just sending tons of traffic to that page and trying to sell as many as I could. And one of the things that I noticed when I looked back at it in September and into October was that you could see the sales of book 1, that's really obvious, but what you didn't see until you dug into it in the KDP dash, very simple to do, just looking at the books 2, 3, 4 and 5, that was what I tended to restrict myself to, and you could see a really obvious read through. Those books would be going from selling 5 a day to selling 25 a day in some cases. And that read-through continued through September, even after I switched the spend off on the campaign, meaning that I'd made the money back. And there aren't just 5 books in my series, so even as they get through to the 5th book, there's another 6 or 7 in the Milton series, plus my Beatrix series, plus my Isabella series, and I know there's crossover between those. So that spend, which sounds like quite a lot, especially if it's just a gamble, it wasn't a gamble. It is looking very likely, in fact more than that, it is absolutely certain that it's leading to read through, and I'm extremely confident that that ad cost has already been covered, and I'm now looking at making a profit in subsequent months. So definitely you want to be looking at read through when you're working out your Facebook ad spend. Now, other tips on Facebook: look to send ads to more expensive items. Now, not necessarily on Amazon. One thing you could do is to look at, let's say, a mega bundle. Let's say you've got 10 books in your series and you charge $25 for that. Amazon won't give you 70% on anything above $9.99. You need to be looking at places like Kobo and iBooks where you'll get 70%. So that $25 sticker is going to get you just shy of $20 back when the 70% is taken into account, and that's going to look like a really healthy profit when you start advertising it. And it doesn't matter if those ads are more expensive, because you've got a much bigger royalty to play with. You only need one sale to cover quite a lot of clicks, and I found whenever I switch those ads on, I usually get a kind of an email from Mark at Kobo saying that they've noticed that a lot of the Milton mega bundles have been shifting, so I know that they're working. Also look at sending ads to other retailers. So Kobo is great. Same goes for iTunes, iBooks, and other stores as well. Barnes & Noble not quite so much in my experience, but there's going to be less competition on those stores. So you can get cheaper clicks, which means that you have more clicks to play with before you need to make a sale in order to cover your costs. And also look at sending to other geographical stores. So I'm looking all the time at places like Germany at the moment. I'm experimenting in Germany, and I've had lots of success in Australia. Australia's been really good. It's probably my 3rd biggest market now, and that's because I've been cultivating that market with a fairly consistent ad spend for the last 6 or 7 months, and I'm now finding that those Milton books are doing really well over there and generating positive daily returns for me. The next tip we need to look at is foreign markets. So what do I mean by foreign markets? Well, one of the things that I'm looking at in the next few months, and I suppose the next year or so, is to try and get my books into other foreign markets, and primarily into different languages. So the genesis for this came when I was invited to go over to Berlin about 6 weeks ago and asked to speak at an Amazon Academy event. So it was great fun. We had maybe 150 authors, I suppose, perhaps even a touch less than that, who turned up to hear me speak for a little bit about the things that I do to help market my books. And after I spoke to the authors who were there, it was really obvious to me, and also after I spoke to the Amazon guys who run the KDP store over in Germany, it was obvious to me that there was, this was kind of like a golden time for the market over there. It was kind of like it would have been in the States about 5 years ago, and in the UK, actually more than 5 years ago, perhaps maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and in the UK 5 or 6 years ago. So in particular, it seemed to me that there was less competition, that ranks were stickier. Once you were able to rank highly in the store, it was easier to maintain those ranks and therefore to maintain the sales, and also that it took less to actually hit those high ranks, and that of course is because there is less competition. Now, one of the things that I'm starting to look at now is to get those books that I've got published. Primarily, I'm going to start with the Beatrix Rose series, so a 3-book series, smaller 55 to 60,000 word novels. Get those translated into German and try and apply the marketing techniques, primarily the Facebook ads, to try and get some sales in the German market. And also after that, and I mean subsequent to Germany, I went to speak at a conference in Italy last month. And I would say the Italian market is significantly further behind the German market, and therefore obviously behind US and UK. And I think that it's probably true also for the other Latin markets, France and Spain. Very, very early in the piece for those markets. But on the other hand, that presents us with an opportunity, and the same kind of opportunity that we might have in Germany. It's a really good time to be getting into those markets, establishing ourselves so that we're ready to compete when they mature in a few years' time. So another of the benefits of doing this is that those ads are going to be cheaper. There is less competition to target readers in the German market, for example, just because in my admittedly anecdotal evidence, there are less authors doing that. The readers aren't getting tons and tons of Facebook ads or other kinds of ads, and that means that the ads should be cheaper to serve. Now, on the other hand, this all sounds great. There's a fantastic opportunity to get your books into these markets, but there are significant, very significant, in fact, costs in order to do that. So my books are written fairly obviously in English, but I'm going to want to be selling those books in translation. I could, and in fact I do, sell a decent amount of books in foreign markets in English, so appealing to readers over there in Germany, for example, who are happy to read in English. But I don't know what the percentage would be, but I should imagine it's a very, very small percentage of the total market who would be prepared to read in a language that isn't their mother tongue. So in order to appeal to them and to provide them with a book in German, for example, we're going to need to get those books translated. Now, that is not a cheap undertaking. We have the translator. We also need then to have an editor to look over the translation. These are effectively new literary works, and you want to make sure that the no errors would slip into the translation in just the same way that we would hire an editor to look at our works in English. So there's 2 professionals that we need to hire. I'm in the process of digging into that right now. I've got the translators of some very well-known English books, including Donna Tartt's works, also some Clive Cussler, some Stephen King. I'm speaking to those translators to see what it would cost to get those books translated from English to German. I suspect for that 150,000 word 3-book series, I'm looking at around about 15,000 euros all in. So that is a very significant investment that I need to front first of all before I'm then able to try and recoup that investment through sales. So we will see. I'm fortunate enough that I can afford to do that, and it is still a bit of a gamble, but I think it's one that I'm comfortable with taking, just because Germany is a vast market. They love reading, And as I say, I've seen some interesting signs that suggest that it's a good time to be getting into that market. So certainly something to be thinking about there. And one other final thing that we're going to need to look at if we are going into foreign markets in a different language is that, especially if we're doing Facebook ads, those ads will also need to be in the language that we're targeting. So I'm going to need to find a social media coordinator or perhaps a native speaker to act as a virtual assistant to help me with that kind of stuff. Fortunately enough, I think I have someone who can help me with that, but that's something that we'd need to do for every market that we move into. So the seventh of the tips that I want to cover is looking at messenger bots. Now, let me explain what those are. Facebook has a product that it calls Messenger, and Messenger is its alternative to email. So it's all within an app. It presents typically on our phones, although of course you can get on desktop too, and it allows us to send messages to people that are also on Facebook. All fairly straightforward. But as is the way with Facebook, they're looking to monetize that as far as possible. So they're looking to introduce ads or sponsored messages into the Messenger platform, and also allowing us the ability to reach our readers, in our case our subscribers, by way of using that Messenger platform. Now, it is divisive. There's no two ways about that. When I've mentioned to people what I'm doing with messenger bots, people do often get a little bit kind of hot under the collar. They think this is not a good idea, sending marketing messages through Messenger. Now, we heard all this when email marketing came out a long time ago. It's always something that we hear when these new avenues for reaching our customers open up. And provided that it is obvious that it's an opt-in, it's not something that we're pushing, we're not spamming people, that kind of, not sending those kinds of emails or correspondence, I think this is something that we can easily get around. Now, the other thing to say about messenger bots, we need a little bit of software or an application to help us to manage this. And what a messenger bot does is that it effectively links up with our Facebook account. I use a piece of software called ManyChat, and as soon as, say, someone sends me a message with a trigger word in it, the bot wakes up and starts to serve automated messages to that person. As soon as anyone interacts with the bot, or in fact anyone sends me a message full stop, what Facebook does is it deems that they are a subscriber to my messenger. And when we're ready, we can use something like ManyChat to send a message to those subscribers in just the same way that we'd use MailChimp to send a message to people who are on our mailing lists. Now, I did this for the first time really for a launch. Yesterday, as I'm recording this, I had a short novella out called Scorpion, and I have been gathering these subscribers for a couple of months now, maybe 3 months, and I've got 2,500 or something along those lines, just over 2,000. Who are subscribers to me. And what I did was that I put a message together and I sent it out, staggering it so that it arrived in people's on their phones or in their messenger inboxes at the same time wherever they are in the world, around about 9 o'clock in the morning. And the cool thing about these messages is that the open rates and the interaction with those messages is frankly insane compared to what the levels are that we can achieve with email. So I sent out this message yesterday, and the open rate was, I'm no kidding here, it was over 95%. So the reason for that is it's impossible to miss them. They don't go into spam. There's no Gmail equivalent of a promotions folder, at least not yet. And as soon as those messages are received on devices, on phones for example, the phone will beep, and often the message will be displayed on the lock screen and needs to be swiped off before you can proceed to whatever it was that you wanted to do. So the open rates are really sky high. If you can get 40% on an email, you're doing pretty well, but I've never heard of email marketing over 90%. It is frankly ridiculous. And as soon as the message is opened, then it's up to you to persuade the receiving party to take the action that you want. And that was something that I found, again, is very high. So in this case, the click rate, so clicking through onto Amazon, was around about 30%. Now, a click rate on an email would be between 10 and 15, maybe 20% if you're doing well. But 30%, and I've had upwards of 30% before, is just fantastic. And so when people were there, they can then of course go on and buy the book. And I think I had something like 500 clicks onto the various product pages that I was hosting the book on yesterday. So really, really effective. So it is divisive, as I say. People are going to be reluctant to look at this. And I suspect also that a reason people are that way is because we're authors, right? We don't want to feel that we're pushy or that we're marketers. But unfortunately, that is something that we have to get our heads around, because people aren't going to buy our books if they don't know about them. And what we should be doing is to getting into these kinds of new, exciting delivery channels as early as we can, when the costs are low, there's no competition. This is still really new stuff. I haven't seen any authors doing book launches like the one that I did yesterday. And so it works really, really well. So it's a great time to be getting into this kind of stuff. Other applications that we can look at with these messenger bots are things like Bookbot Bob and Bookbot Bill. Now that's run by someone who works on the SPF team. Kerry Gardner runs those, and what she's done is really impressive. She's set up a bot that sits on an account, and as readers interact with her, she then is able to build up big lists in the same kind of way as Bookbub, although not at that scale, with readers divided into genres. And then she can interact with authors and use that bot to send out daily emails of deals or promotions to those segmented readers. And I know that Kerry is having tons and tons of success with that right now. So again, something to think about. And just finally on these bots, one of the other things that I'm doing, if you go to Mark Dawson Author, I think it is on Facebook, that's my Facebook page, and send me a message. And then if you type in John, if that's your message, just John on its own, short for John Milton, of course, what will then happen is the bot will notice that trigger word and will then lead you through a curated sequence of questions, a bit like Choose Your Own Adventure, if you remember those from the 80s, asking you what kind of book you'd like to read. Excuse me. And depending on whether you want something based on geography, so I have lots of books set all around the world, or reader reviews, or popularity, or films that you like, I can then use the bot to direct you down a path that will lead to the book that's most appropriate for what you're looking to read at that particular time. And this was something that I put together in about an hour and a half, and it's really, really good. It's very effective. Readers seem to like it. I'll get great feedback on it. And every time someone interacts with that bot, they're added as a subscriber, which means, as I was able to do yesterday, I can send them out something telling them that there's a new book that I think that they will like. So there you go, that's bots. Now just think about that for a minute. There are reservations, as I've laid out, but there are plenty of really excellent benefits that I think means that you should give them a good bit of understanding, a good bit of thought, so that you can see what the potential is. And once more, we're going to be having a module on how to use these bots with Kerry actually leading it. And that's going to be ready at some point later in the year and will be available to Ads for Authors students. Okay, so the final tip that we're going to look at right now is list swaps. So what is a list swap? Well, it's basically authors working together. If you have author A, who has a mailing list of 1,000 people, and you have author B, who has a mailing list of 800 people, let's just say, those authors will work together and they will advertise each other's freebies or list magnets, reader magnets, in exchange for the other also doing the same thing. So author A might send out a message to his 1,000 readers saying you can get author B's book at this link here, and then you use something like InstaFreebie or BookFunnel for the readers to download the book, but the quid pro quo will be that they need to leave an email address, so author B's list will grow. And then maybe a week or two later, author B will return the favor and send out an email to his 800 subscribers telling them about an offer that author A has. This is a really good way to get started to build your lists quite quickly. And as I say, places like InstaFreebie and BookFunnel have made that really easy. And what they do is they will allow you to host your freebies, your free books, and make it really easy for readers to get those onto their devices wherever they do their reading. And they also can make that gated so that in order to get the download, the reader needs to leave the email address, and then both of them will now link with MailChimp automatically and will funnel those new subscribers onto your mailing list. So they're really effective. They're a great way to grow your list when you're starting out. the caveat I would say is that they're not for everyone. It's not something that I would do, for example. The reason for that is that I have a pretty big list now, a fairly established list, nearly 100,000 people on it. And it's not really in my interests to do list swaps with people. Certainly not with anyone who has a significantly smaller list than that, just because there's no reciprocity really. But the other reason for me is that, as I say, I'm fairly established with that list, and my readers are not used to me doing that kind of thing. They wouldn't be used to me sending out recommendations for other readers. I don't email very much. I only really email when it's something that I have that's new, or a deal that I think might be interesting to them. What I don't want to do is to start sending them emails they're not expecting, because I know for sure that I'll start to get spam complaints, abuse reports, all that kind of bad stuff. So I wouldn't do that. But if I was starting out and I had a smaller list of 500 or 2,000 or 5,000, this would be a good tactic to grow your list pretty quickly. And I've seen plenty of students who've taken the SPF 101 course, the beginner's course, really grow their lists fast, and also grow responsive lists, because they handle the reactions with those new readers. They set expectations really effectively, and then they follow through on those expectations in terms of frequency of delivery, content, all of that kind of stuff. And they're able to do that properly, so that those lists grow up in a fashion that means that they continue to be responsive, they're well managed, they can use them to recruit advanced readers, and all of that kind of really useful stuff. So something to think about if you're at the start of your career, and I would recommend looking at InstaFreebie or BookFunnel, two really good companies that will enable you to do this kind of thing easily and without any of the technical problems or headaches that you might have otherwise. Okay, so that is it. 7 tips that I hope will be of interest to you. Will give you some ideas for marketing ideas that are working. Some of them are cutting edge, the bots and things like that. Others are just good practice. But I want you to have a think about those. They're working really well for me right now, and I think they could work well for you too. Apologies right again, as it should have been pretty obvious, I've been struggling with a cold over the couple of days that I've been recording these tips. I hope it wasn't too distracting. I've been sniffing like mad in between takes. So I hope that, as I say, didn't distract you from the information too much. Now, if you want to get in touch with me, you are more than welcome to do so. You can get me at selfpublishingformula.com. That's the website where you can get lots of free books. You can also get a free 3-part video series on Facebook advertising. We also have a regular Friday podcast that is becoming more and more popular, where we interview some very successful indies. We've got Hugh Howey coming on. We've had Bella Andre, Barbara Freethy. And I also, with my co-host James, host regular masterclasses where we'll dig into a topic. We did Readthrough this morning, just recording it this morning. Lots of information there that will help you to calibrate your own marketing. We also have a free community on Facebook, a closed community. If you do a search for Self-Publishing Formula, you should find that, and we'd be delighted to have you there as well. If you want to email me, I'm at mark@selfpublishingformula.com. And the next time we open our course, the premium flagship Ads for Authors course, is going to be in November, hopefully at the start of November, but it might drift into the middle of the month. But you can get all of that information at selfpublishingformula.com. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the Indie Author Fringe. Please do feel free to get in touch with me if there's anything I can help you with. And in the meantime, I will wish you happy writing, happy book sales, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to another great session brought to you by the Indie Author Fringe and the Alliance of Independent Authors, Ally. You can find out more about both by visiting Ally's Self-Publishing Advice Centre, www.selfpublishingadvice.org. Now, go write and publish.